year, one major thing this year. The pandemic came with a challenge, but also presented an immense opportunity because it threw everybody into the sea of cyberspace. And we realized that we could actually make engagements. When we started the webinars, most people were home. So we tended to have very, very large meetings. The webinars were preceded by a workshop in the month on the day on 25th of April this year. And we got our members, about 170 people who joined that meeting at about a 6-hour engagement. And we divided ourselves into sectors. The main goal of that workshop was to look for the opportunities that this pandemic posed, not the chaos, but the opportunities. Of course, we acknowledge the chaos as well. And what we decided to do after that was to hold public engagements. We realized that we could actually do this quite effectively, reaching a number of people using this mode of communication. This is our 21st engagement on different public issues. So you're very welcome. What we've been doing is, in addition to the think pieces that were written, we use these meetings to capture your thoughts and ideas. We really welcome your expert opinions to critique the initial thinking, to add to it, to subtract to it. And the next goal we've embarked on now is doing policy briefs that would help inform public policy. We're very honored today to be in the presence of Land Friends. And as the Land Friends take center stage, the rest of us will disappear into the background. So have a great day. And we always say, take off your, put on your thinking caps and open up your minds. And we trust we'll have a very, very fruitful engagement. Thank you very much. On behalf of CASO, you're most welcome. And back to you, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. James Magara, for welcoming us. We are always honored to be part of these conversations as members, but also as citizens of Uganda and Christians at that. Allow me now to invite Ms. Mercy Kainobwisho to present the centerpiece for our conversation today. Mercy is a qualified, competent, and experienced female advocate of the courts of judicature here in Uganda, with 15 years experience specializing in business and company law, as well as intellectual property law. She has extensive experience in these subjects, as well as oil and gas in Uganda, and has participated in developing and reviewing related legal regimes, reforms to ease registration process, mediations concerning intellectual property oppositions and conflicts between shareholders, subscribers in company matters, and has given general legal and technical advice on business, intellectual property, and practice. Mercy holds a master's degree in intellectual property law from the University of Turin in Italy. She has a master's degree in business administration from Makerere University, a postgraduate diploma in legal practice from the Law Development Center, Uganda, as well as a Bachelor of Laws degree from Makerere University. She has gained numerous technical and leadership qualifications, like the certificate in leadership from the Rotary Leadership Training Institute, certificate in leadership from the Oxids Institute for National Transformation, postgraduate certificates in oil and gas, among others. It is my pleasure to invite Mercy to come and now present the centerpiece for our conversation this morning. Mercy, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel, and good morning to you all. I am happy to be making a presentation on the opportunities that are in the justice, law, and order sector. It is important to appreciate that the COVID-19 pandemic caused a lot of disruption, caused a lot of crisis, and but we also have to note the fact that it caused a lot of opportunities for us in all sectors of our economy. And I'm glad that this morning we'll be discussing and focusing on the justice, law and order sector in Uganda. The justice, law and order sector in Uganda, and I'm glad the senior technical advisor, I see Ms. Richard Odoi and all key players, has been involved in supporting the different key players or members of the sector itself in as far as personnel, financial resources are concerned, in terms of national emergencies, planning, facilitating the different trainings, capacity building in our country. And COVID-19 pandemic did not leave the sector the same way. And this is envisaged in the fact that most of the services were disrupted. Access to justice was disrupted to a big extent. But this did not mean that the access to justice was denied in this country. And today's presentation will focus on how we can use the opportunities that are before us in the sector to thrive. What is the justice, law and order sector? The justice, law and order sector is a sector-wide approach that was adopted by the government of Uganda. And the purpose of this was to maximize the synergies and efficiencies of all institutions that contribute to the justice system. The justice, law and order sector brings together 18 institutions, and these 18 institutions are aligned to the administration of justice, maintaining of law and order, protection of human rights, development of a common vision, a policy framework, and implementing the vision in the medium term, the short term, and the long term. So this sector focuses on a holistic approach that leads to improvement of access to justice and administration of justice through a sector-wide approach. And this also involves a lot of planning, alignment of the institutional strategic investment plans with the sector institutional investment plan, the budgeting, aligning the programs of the 18 institutions, and doing a monitoring and evaluation. But what are these 18 institutions that make the justice, law and order sector? We have the Ministry of Justice and Constitution Affairs. We have the Ministry of Internal Affairs. We have the Directorate of Public Prosecutions. We have Uganda Prison Service. We have the Judiciary. We have Uganda Police. We have the Judicial Service Commission, the Ministry of Local Government, in as far as local courts are concerned, the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development with regard to probation and juvenile justice, the Uganda Law Reform Commission, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Law Development Center, the Tax Appeals Tribunal, the Uganda Law Society, a Center for Arbitration and Dispute Resolution, the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, the institution that employs me, then the National Identification Registration Authority. The strategic objectives of GELOS. GELOS has three strategic objectives according to the strategic investment plan. And these strategic objectives lead and guide the different key players, the institutions, and all the strategic investment plans of these institutions must be aligned to the justice, law and order strategic objectives. Strategic objective number one is to enhance the justice, law and order sector infrastructure, access to justice services. The second is to promote the observance of human rights and fight corruption. And every sector, every member of the sector has an anti-corruption strategy among other strategies that are in place. And the last is to strengthen commercial justice and environment for competitiveness, because GELOS believes in the fact that competitiveness is the one that moves many nations. Thank you very much. And then the strength of the sector, is that we have a secretariat that brings us together. It coordinates these 18 institutions. Many institutions fail because they work in silos. And this provides strategic and technical coordination to drive results, because at the end of every year, at the end of even the strategic investment year, we assess and monitor how have these organizations performed. The other advantage is that the sector is so strong and committed and ensures that we are coordinated. We are following one vision, and the strategic development plans and institutional plans are very clear for these institutions. The sector avails funds from Government of Uganda and other donor agencies. In fact, most of our institutions, if not all, rely entirely to the support given from GELOS to implement our vision. The sector has also improved coverage in as far as access to justice is concerned within the country. The level of automation and digitization of all services has been enabled by GELOS, and the sector has a strong human resource qualified to deliver on their mandate. When COVID struck, we are now about 8 or 9 months into COVID, that we did not envisage. We did not predict. We had not done scenario planning. So there are so many challenges that were hit by the COVID. And most of these services were hampered because of the gaps in as far as technology is concerned, the leadership gaps, the unfilled positions, because there are positions that are not filled within the sector, the different institutions in the sector, which cause a lot of backlog, the slowdown in the process of dispensing with justice and general decision-making. The other risk that COVID-19 exposed was the lack of a strong emergency response plan. And this has caused a lot of risk and also activated the need to do a risk mapping and planning and mitigation strategies. The inadequate investment in ICT, many of our institutions are not at the same level. The level of the ICT infrastructure regarding the hardware and the software led to a slowdown or even stoppage on the services. But with time, because most of the institutions that had automated their systems through the electronic document management system and had the equipment, they were not so affected. But these technology gaps are evident that during COVID, most of the services were affected, and even the high cost of internet and access thereof. The other challenge is lack of a clear legal framework to deal with the pandemic. There were emergency decisions that needed to be taken, but where is the law? Where is where's the legal backing? Most of these decisions that could have been made during the COVID-19 pandemic are likely to cause suits by interested parties. So most of these decisions needed the backing of the law in order to pass emergency laws, but also take decisions. The disregard of justice processes in as far as the failure to respect court orders from leaders. Of course, there are some court orders that were taken. Some court orders continue to be taken and are not implemented. Then the human capital challenge, which creates the knowledge gaps, the untrained human resource, especially in online interventions. The whole labor sector needs to be trained intentionally to adapt to the ICT needs of every sector or every institution. The impact of COVID in justice, law and order sector in Uganda. Why are we here to discuss the opportunities? We need to assess the impact. How big was or how deep was this impact? First of all, we all appreciate the fact that there was a lot of interruption in services and programs. We saw court proceedings, hearings being suspended and appearances adjourned and die. We saw a failure in access to legal representation, and this affected human rights access. I know the lawyers were not that essential and they could not represent during the time. We saw prisoners and remandees not being represented in court. All execution proceedings were suspended, restriction of prison visitations, and movement of prisoners. All conferences and training programs were suspended. And when it comes to the impact on the vulnerable communities, we appreciate the fact that these COVID restrictions had an impact on access to redress mechanisms and legal aid support, for example, to the refugees, the women, the children, the homeless. And even Uganda police reported a rise in domestic violence against women and children, but also teenage pregnancies. The defilement rates and levels went high, which was very unfortunate. And the institution, the Jealous institution also has the transitional plans. And this must be appreciated because without transitioning to the new normal, it's hard to access justice. There was an activation, a link for the courts. Jealous moved fast, the institutions, to court sessions so that the key court cases are given priority to proceed. Courts continued handling certificates of urgency, taking plea for serious cases and bail applications. Some institutions like QRSB provided electronic services for all its services, and this was enabled by Jealous through the digitization of all documentation and also putting electronic systems in time. Also to ensure business continuity during lockdown, the Uganda Law Society partnered with the judiciary to use Zoom video. The Uganda prisons also established a quarantine space for isolation of cases. There was conferencing used during adjudication of matters. The Uganda Human Rights Commission, for example, came up with several interventions related to observance of human rights. The focus on the frontline services was enabled, especially the Uganda police that were at the front line, by providing them with the protective gear that was needed and so on, and of course providing security for people and the persons around it. What are those opportunities that we'd like to emphasize as council? One, there's an opportunity to migrate to digital tools, to expand outreach and routine work. We saw this from working from home. Many of us had to work from home for business continuity. There's need for business continuity plans for the sector. There was also the opportunity to resort to eco-friendly options, online processes that have enabled the paperless transactions. We know this can be done. COVID has brought this to us. There's also that opportunity to use alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, especially the electronic dispute resolution mechanisms. COVID-19 also exposed the need to amend procurement laws to support efficiency, especially in emergency responses and routine services. Because the current laws do not enable that. Okay, there are some emergency provisions within the PPDA Act, but they can be better. Then the public-private partnerships can be used as a bridge to strategic gaps in the essential justice, law and order services. What does the CASTO team recommend? The shortage of personnel in the judiciary should be addressed to match the demand, and even other key Jealous institutions. There's need to budget for budget enhancement to ensure appropriate investment, capacity building, change management in the technology-related services, because we know technology now is a driver for every service. It's not a solution, but a driver. And without technology now, we cannot offer services to the best. We cannot address the client's needs. Also, government should expand the reach in as far as ICT technology is concerned around the country, and address also the cost, the affordability, the availability of internet services to facilitate the work of the sector. And the expected benefits, when these are addressed, when these interventions are made, we expect to have improved service delivery, mind shift and behavior change of especially the human capital, then the embracing of ICT solutions, adaptability to remote working, business continuity plan for every member of the sector, budget adjustments to priorities. For example, if a lot of budgets were put on travels abroad, attending trainings and conferences, is there a way we can reroute this budget to have online engagements? Then there's need for more investment in health systems, more investment in ICT, and ICT here we mean the hardware and the software. There's need to enhance collaboration, coordination, and partnerships. These are strategic partnerships. And also the need to adapt, the need for flexibility in terms of COVID pandemic. In conclusion, the justice, law and order sector is critical for us, and to offer indispensable services to the citizens of every country and even residents in disseminating the relevant information and access to justice. We need to empower and invest a lot in the justice, law and order sector. The administration of justice and law and order was affected, as I mentioned herein above, and there's need to use those strategic interventions that I have mentioned, including but not limited to ICT infrastructure, putting e-systems in place, procurement of the relevant hardware and software solutions, amending relevant laws to enable online transactions or e-justice system, development of business continuity plans, electronic document management systems, prioritization of cases, access to protective gear for the workers in the jail's institution, e-decentralization of services, training in the use of digital systems, promoting online alternative dispute resolutions. I've already mentioned all these. So when these are addressed, I know we can thrive as the justice, law and order sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mercy, for that very eloquent presentation regarding the JELO sector. We shall now have our first discussant to speak to us, and I'll introduce him shortly. Dr. George Bamugemereire. Dr. Bamugemereire was appointed Deputy Inspector General of Government in March 2013, and that is a position that he holds to date. He has had a varied career, both in the public and private sector, prior to appointment in his current role. He worked for Shell International in Uganda, in Latin America, and the United Kingdom for a total of 14 years, and rose to the position of Team Leader, Global Employee Share Purchase Plan for Shell International in London. Prior to that, he was a resident state attorney in the office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions for West Nile and Eastern Uganda in Mbale for 7 years. He holds a Bachelor of Laws degree, a Master of Laws, specializing in mergers and acquisitions from Makerere University, as well as a postgraduate diploma in legal practice. He has also received extensive training in human resource management in the United Kingdom. He also holds 2 honorary doctorates, and he was a founding member of the Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity. He is also a life member of the Bible Society and Scripture Union of Uganda. Dr. George is also married and has 2 children. He's married to Her Lordship, the Honorable Lady Justice Catherine Bamugemereire, who we all know and deserves no further introduction. Uncle George, as I fondly call him, you are most welcome to discuss the presentation within 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Ruhweza, for that introduction. And thank you very much, Mercy Kanawisho from the registrar URSB for that excellent presentation that you've just made regarding the yellow sector. I mean, it was really extensive. It covered everything. And thank you very much, Castle Think Tank and Dr. Magara for the invitation you've extended to me. I have 15 minutes and my understanding now is that the time is 9:35 a.m. So I should be done by, with my poor maths, I think it says 9:50.
45.
Yeah, 45. 9:45. Dan, I think we both have problems with maths. Okay, thank you very much. Before I respond to Mercy's very, very comprehensive paper, I just want to take note of the following. Some of the observations that we can make as ordinary citizens of Uganda. Number one, that COVID, and I think this has come through very clearly in Mercy's paper, is a time that just fell upon us. If you asked us in January when we're making resolutions for 2020, what we'd be doing, the concept of COVID did not exist. So it has forced us into innovation. It has also exposed us, exposed the limitation of man. That man can plan, man can do a lot of things, but there are certain things that man will never know. I think issues that only God knows. So for all the planning, all the science and so on, there has nobody envisaged that a virus would shut down the world for several months. We don't know when the opening up will actually happen. Now this should be contrasted with, say, the Y2K. The year 2000, when there were all sorts of predictions that, you know, those who will be flying on the 31st of December 1999, planes would drop from the sky, the banks would be wiped out, and so on. And man made a lot of preparations for the Y2K because that was something that had been envisaged. And questions are being asked, was it a con? Was it a trick? Because task forces were set up. I know the company I was working with, they literally shut down everything and all the effort was diverted to the issue of Y2K. Then we have also noticed during this lockdown that apart from the issue of food and maybe medical services, which were limited due to transport, the country was run very efficiently. You may notice that I think the president was the president of Uganda, and maybe actually many presidents around the world were running their countries directly because they had cut out a lot of the layers of governments, you know, people who occupy offices and introduce bureaucracies and so on, were all outside office because they were locked away at home. So information would get to the president same day, and if need be, there would be a meeting and he would address the country. And many of you may have noticed that actually the country longs for leadership because people would be waiting to listen to what the president has to say. I think those are all important observations. Mercy has already mentioned that the costs went down because now people stopped traveling, people stopped flying, workshops were cut down, and people are using technologies. She also mentioned families were forced to live together. Many that have never lived together were able to live together. We also note that there was organizations got rid of a lot of things that they actually do not need. Practices that are carried out, but are not necessarily necessary. Now, turning to Mercy, I was looking up administration of justice, which really JELOS represents and what it means. And this is what I found. They said administration of justice is one of the primary functions of the state. The main function of administration of justice, and actually they named three, is protection of individual rights, enforcement of laws, and punishment of wrongdoers. So you can see there are three aspects of administration of justice, which makes me really believe that indeed the concept of jealous was a very good one, because it brought all these functionalities that are related under one roof. But it also, we notice that over the years, governments and businesses have developed practices and structures which have diverted them from their primary goal. Because here, look at administration of justice. I don't know how many people actually ever think about it in terms of the way it is stated in the law. Main function is individual rights, protection of individual rights, enforcement of laws, and punishment of wrongdoers. But it's not just the government, it's actually the private sector or mankind. That over the years, there are certain principles that are agreed upon. Then over years, you build in layers and layers of activities, structures, laws, and so on, that actually divert or digress you from the primary function of your role. But COVID, I think COVID has had its many positive results. The first one is that the restrictions of society by COVID created great opportunities for us. And the main opportunity I see is for us to rethink the primary objectives, the primary goals of all our endeavors, including administration of justice. Remember, the main objectives are protection of individual rights, enforcement of laws, and punishment of wrongdoing. But I don't know, and I've attended many, many workshops of JELOS and other institutions. I rarely hear these three concepts: protection of individual rights, enforcement of laws, punishment of wrongdoers. I mean, I've had Mercy use it. But I wonder why we don't hear the concepts. When you typically listen to a speech, for instance, by the judiciary and many of these institutions, let's take the example of judiciary. A typical judiciary speech will state, we have a lot of backlog. Mr. President, recruit more judges. Recruit more judges. If it is the police, they say we are still thin on the ground. Recruit more policemen. Indeed, recently they were bolstered with the recruitment of LDUs. But let's take a look at COVID, the COVID time. When travel was restricted, when curfew was imposed, when movement, even during daytime, was actually limited, what happened? Crime went down. The safety of citizens went up. Government was forced to concentrate on the primary objectives of its existence, keeping the country alive and running. And that, to me, is a big, big learning from COVID. Issues of human rights are a big problem the world over. But there are countries that have been able to overcome this question. How have they done it? If you go to Denmark, Sweden, and so on, they'll tell you that crime is so low. In fact, in some of those European countries, prisons are being shut down because they are not necessary. They don't have enough people to lock up in the prisons, to fit in our traditional jealous structure of punishment of wrongdoers and enforcement. And if you ask, how have they done it? They tell you that for the last 150 years, these countries have spent time teaching their children one concept: do to others what you'd like them to do for you. So as a result, a Danish person, a Swedish person, and many other countries in that region will know that if I get out of my house at 9 or 10 p.m. and walk in darkness, nobody will harm me. Why? Because everybody has been taught that do not do to a person what you do not want to be done to you. So, isn't this the right time for this country to rethink whether, in fact, to examine whether there isn't another way of achieving the goals? Because the goals, as we've been saying, it is protection of individual rights. We've grown to believe that individual rights are protected by locking up, having more prisons, having more policemen, having more judges, having more LDs, having more soldiers, and so on. But look at some of these other countries who took a long-term view and said, isn't there a way we will actually address protection of individual rights by educating children to do the right thing, teaching them the neighbor principle, do not do to others what you not want to be done to you. Why do we leave our homes in fear? You walk out and a child gets out of the house. I mean, look at some people are young parents where you have to keep looking at your child. In some of those countries, actually, you don't really care. Your child will find it. If you forget a child on the bus, somebody will, the child will be deposited at some central place where you can find them. Here, if you do not see your child for 2 hours when you expect to see them, then expect the worst news that somebody will offer the child for sacrifice and so on. So I think what COVID has done and what it has taught us is that we should think about other ways of addressing the problems that we think we have been conditioned to believe. And I think that is one of the things that jealous has taught us. Number two, it has brought to the fore the need for efficiency. There's been we've not had, I mean, resources were actually there. I think many government departments returned money to the central coffers because the money was not used. I mean, the activities that are planned were not used. Now, what is the lesson there? Resources were returned, and yet activities went on. The essential activities necessary to keep the human being, the Ugandan alive, the Kenyan alive, the American alive, actually continued during the lockdown. Why don't we consider ways of ensuring that services, essential services that are required for the human being to exist, are actually delivered in some way? And COVID has been one of the lessons. If you look at the employment of a judge, for instance, which I have already referred to as one of the typical topics, to say, how do you solve the crime problem of Uganda? Solve backlog, recruit 80 judges. And after 8, I think we shall ask for another 30 and so on. What does it cost the country to have a judge? You need to buy the judge a 4-wheel drive car. You need to find the judge 4 guards. You need to find the judge furniture, salary, attire, and so on. Now, all that is good and it's very nice. But is that the primary solution to the administration of justice? My argument is, let's think about some other ways. And Mercy, thank you very much, because you've been able to point out a number of initiatives. Lastly, I would like to talk about the concept of jobs. Many economists are arguing and saying, government's role is to create jobs. And you know, some of these things are actually diversionary. Your primary role is to create jobs. But what is the purpose of jobs? Jobs, the purpose of jobs is actually to create, to give people a livelihood. I think this could be restated in a different way. If you said the primary services to the people that improve their well-being. So if we were to tilt the thinking, the current thinking, and just switch it, tweak it the other way and say, why do we do things? Why do we create jobs? Jobs are created to address needs. That is the real reason why jobs are created. But we are now hearing a lot of campaigns saying, create this job so that you recruit this person, create this to accommodate this person, create this job to give somebody a livelihood, and so on. Now that is a reversal of the primary role of a job. A job is created only when there is a need to be solved. And that need, and only when the need can only be solved through human intervention. So what has COVID taught us? It's actually that let's get to the core. What is necessary? How do we get the services that we seek without necessarily recruiting? And I'm finishing with one line about efficiency. COVID time ensured that only the things that are needed could be done, even in the jealous area. Under jealous, I mean, they're saying there was an issue of how do we transport prisoners? How do we even keep prisoners, so many people in the same place, when this disease is transmitted through human interface? So people said, okay, let's now use video. And we saw some video. Suddenly, video technology became useful and important. We saw people, the need for transporting prisoners was also cut down. The need for lawyers to congregate and bring crowds into the courtroom, all that went down. Now, what is the country looking for? The country is looking for efficiency. What is efficiency? Efficiency is having maximum output with highest impact in the shortest time at the lowest cost. I think for me, all administrators running organizations, including ours here, the Inspectorate of Government, we are actually back to the drawing board asking ourselves, are we on track? We have done so many things. We've been around 30 years doing this and that, but are we meeting the needs of the population? Are we meeting the objectives of the setup of our organization? And this question should actually be cutting across all endeavors. Private and public sector should be asking, why were we set up? Why did we set up the way we did? Is the way we are doing things the most efficient way of doing what we are doing? Thank you very much, Mercy, for that comprehensive presentation. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Dr. George Bamgemerere, for speaking passionately and also bringing in a very unique angle, which I think is very critical for our conversation today, first as Christians, as Oxids, and as citizens. And that one that came out more for me was do unto others. Do unto others as you'd want them to do to you, and making sure that that continues to be brought out again and again in our education sector, right from the home and on to the rest of the people who are in society, in the schools, in the churches, everywhere else. I like the fact that you brought out the fact that we have seen that it is possible for us to be effective in what we do and use the resources that we have efficiently. Now, we have our first poll question. Our first poll question, we are going to ask members to go into our first poll question, which I am launching right now. I think someone is helping me. It's supposed to take 1 minute, so I'll give you some time to just go through that poll question in about a minute. Thank you. If you're having difficulty to find where the poll is, please let us know and someone will try to assist in that regard. For the sake of those who are on Facebook, this is the poll question. This is the poll question. Which category of citizens do you think suffered the most from interruptions to access to justice? Which category of citizens do you think suffered the most from interruptions to access to justice? The first category is women and children due to domestic violence. Women and children due to domestic violence. The second category is refugees. The third category is incarcerated persons. And lastly, the fourth is those affected by case backlog. All right. Okay, so the results that have come in so far is that 56% of those attending think that women and children were the most affected due to domestic violence. The second at 26% being those affected by case backlog, and the third category of 19% incarcerated persons. There is no vote given to refugees, no vote given to refugees. So that is our poll question. Thank you so much for participating in the poll question. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will now go to the next presentation. The next presentation is going to be our discussant, Miss Rachel Odoi, and I'll introduce her right away. Rachel is the Senior Technical Advisor at the Justice, Law and Order Sector Secretariat. She's an advocate of 22 years standing with specialization in human rights, international law, and commercial law. She has experience working with the Law Reform Commission and Human Rights Commission, as well as in private legal practice. Within the jail law sector, Ms. Odoi Musoke has supported the reform programs in commercial, land, and family justice, as well as traditional justice, before assuming the role of Senior Technical Advisor, where she is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the sector's reform programs across the 18 jailhouse institutions. Ms. Odoi Musoke holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from Makerere University, a master's degree from the University of Witwatersrand, as well as a diploma in legal practice, and she also has several other qualifications. Rachel is a mother of 3, and she's passionate about music and sports. So Rachel, you are most welcome. We shall have 15 minutes for you to interact with what not only the centerpiece was about, but also now there is some important information that Dr. Bamgemerere has raised, and I think you are the best person to respond. Thank you very much, Rachel. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And thank you very much for hosting me here this morning. It's a pleasure to join you and my co-discussants. It's always a pleasant opportunity to discuss JLOS and the JLOS institutions from a positive aspect. Most of the discussions around JLOS usually arise when something has gone wrong, when something negative has happened. So to have the opportunity to discuss JLOS from this perspective is very welcome. Particularly also in this context today and now where we are, the experience we've had over the last 7 or 8 months. I want to also say thank you to Mercy for a very comprehensive introduction of the justice, law and order sector, who we are and what we do. I think she covered that very thoroughly, so there's nothing really I need to add to her presentation. And I also want to thank Dr. Bamgemerere for elaborating a little bit about what it is we should expect from the JLOS institutions, and his emphasis on what administration of justice means, what our responsibilities are, I think is very, very useful. Maybe just to emphasize from the sector perspective, and I agree with him to an extent, our responsibility really is promoting the rule of law, ensuring that law and order is maintained. And that really means that our task as the JLOS institutions is to ensure that the structure is in place for the rule of law to thrive, and that our services are made available in such a way that people are able to access justice. People are able to ensure that the systems of justice serve their needs. I also wanted to agree with him that what he spoke about many other countries that have progressed a lot in the area of the rule of law and respect for the structures of justice. oftentimes we look to the government and say the government should provide this, the government should do that, the government should ensure this. But we need to also start emphasizing our own responsibilities. We look straight towards the criminal justice issue, who was arrested for committing what crime. But justice and the whole concept of the rule of law starts with even the most mundane aspects of our lives. How do we conduct ourselves when we are in public spheres? How do we behave when we are driving a car or walking on a pavement? Do we respect the simple rules that have been put in place? And it's only when we have a culture of respecting those rules can we say that we really do have a system where we abide by the rule of law and we're able to ensure that justice is served to all. But having said that, we still know that the justice institutions have a responsibility and have services that they have to deliver to the public. And that's what we focus on as the justice, law and order sector. How can we ensure that those services are delivered as efficiently and effectively to everybody, and particularly to those who need them the most? So focusing a lot on the vulnerable groups. I think also, as Mercy and Dr. Bamagere mentioned, in January, what we would have anticipated as potential risks to the sector's ability to deliver are not what we are focusing on now. When we developed our strategic plan, we did do a risk assessment. We were looking at the youthful population and the high population growth and what that meant for the delivery of justice services. We were looking at early conflict resolution mechanisms, early conflict detection mechanisms, the impact of conflict in the region, the impact of the increasing number of refugees. We are looking at climate change and the impact of natural resources. So we were looking at many aspects which, to a great extent, were predictable. We never envisaged a medical crisis and a medical crisis at a pandemic level. But we are facing that now. And one thing that I must say for the institutions is, because of the leadership that was in place at the sector level, there was an almost immediate response, particularly from the frontline institutions. Right at the point of the time when the lockdown began, they came together as a task force to start dealing with those immediate issues. Some of the issues that we've been talking about and Mercy referred to. So, for example, what was the impact of the lockdown on security issues, on law and order, and what was the response needed from the public? As the JLOS institutions, we also looked at the issues of safety and security. Safety in regard to the public, but also in regard to the JLOS officers themselves. So it's in that spirit that we had some of the measures that were put into place. For example, restricting access to the prisons, closing down some of the services at that point in time until we could put in place appropriate standard operating procedures. So that was an essential response. It was something that we had to do to protect the public, but also to protect the JLOS actors themselves. And immediately following that, the institutions began to look at alternative measures. What can we do next to bring back these services, especially those ones that are needed immediately, the frontline services, policing services, prosecution services, court services, but also some of the others that we don't immediately think of. For example, registration services. Mercy's with Registration Services Bureau, and she mentioned some of the initiatives that they put in place, immediately launching online platforms that had been in formulation. So there was an immediate response, but it had to be done in that context. I think one of the things that was emphasized, and both the earlier presenters have talked about it, is that COVID presented to us challenges, but it presented to us opportunities as well. For several years prior to that, we've been slowly developing automated systems within the JLOS institutions. So developing software for different platforms to be able to deliver services to the public, creating online or other technological services, but it had been gradual, primarily because of costs, but also because of the change management side of it, and change from our own institutions, but also change from the public, people learning to start using the online services. So the COVID-19 situation created for us an opportunity for us to quickly expedite some of these processes. And I think we've already seen many of them have taken off and have become the norm. So many of you who have already interfaced with the courts will know that the hearings are being had through audiovisual platforms. So you don't have to physically be in the courtroom to attend the hearings. That's something that we worked on, but is now being picked up, and we're able now to expedite the rollout of that process. We've seen a lot of the online platforms that had been in development being launched, being refined, being made more accessible to the public. So it's definitely presented for us an opportunity. But with that opportunity comes a lot of the challenges. Mercy did mention some of them. She mentioned the leadership gap. At the time, of course, we did have a lot of gaps at the leadership level. Fortunately, most of them have since been filled. I think the only outstanding one is with the Human Rights Commission. All the others have now been filled. And that's essential, of course, for the policy guidance, for ensuring that the decisions can be made and can be made quickly. The risk management aspect, it's really made us rethink what we look at the risks, what we look at as risks to the justice sector, broadening our understanding of where our challenges might come from, and what are those things that we need to do differently. We are very steeped as lawyers, because the sector is predominantly lawyers or people who are very closely related to legal practice. We are very steeped in culture and in tradition. We like to do things the way they were done when they were first introduced. So of course, physical court hearings, wanting to write everything in paper and sign your document in the presence of your witnesses. And we're learning to adapt from that and look at other sectors that had already progressed in that area. So we look, for example, at the financial sector that had embraced technology and online platforms much earlier, and we learn from them, and we're able then to begin to emphasize the process of change among the JLOS actors. The challenges, of course, with ICT is in terms of capacity. We do have to ensure that we have the equipment, that we have all the skills that we need, that our own officers are able to interact with technology at a level that enables them to then offer the services to others. But we also then have to deal with the infrastructure itself, being able to reach communities at all levels and being able to reach every point of the country and everybody who needs the service. The beauty, of course, of the online platform, it doesn't take away the physical services, but what it does is it enables us to provide an efficient, effective online service for those who can access it, and thereby free the resources, human resource, financial resources, that can then be targeted to the more vulnerable communities. So for example, if we have online services in the courts where lawyers in Kampala and in all the major cities can attend court virtually, can log on and file their documents, then the officials, the clerks, the registrars, the judicial officers can then focus on serving the more demanded, the communities that need those services and cannot access them on these other platforms. So we're looking at things like mobile courts in remote areas, mobile courts for refugee communities. We're looking at small claims. We're looking at alternative dispute resolution in terms of providing arbitration, mediation, and also spending time working with other agencies, religious leaders, traditional leaders, community leaders, to be able to support the justice system in providing those needs. So the whole situation around the COVID crisis has given us a broader thinking over how we can deliver justice services. I think, and really building from what the poll showed us, one of the critical things we had to do was to respond to the immediate concerns. The frontline services, how do we handle people who have been arrested? What do we do with people who are not complying with the directives around the pandemic and the lockdown, and finding solutions to that? But also, what do we do with emerging issues, sexual and gender-based violence, domestic violence, where we've seen escalating reports. I emphasize that it's escalating reports because we can't be sure that this wasn't what was happening before. And I think COVID has revealed to us a lot of the hidden side of our society, things that we may not have noticed and things that we may have taken for granted. And it's enabled us as justice institutions to begin to appraise ourselves with those issues and focus a little bit more attention on that, because those are the things that are really affecting our community. Those are the things that make the community unsatisfied with the justice system. So it's also given us that opportunity to start looking at some of those hidden issues. Going forward, Mercy indicated a lot of recommendations for the sector, and I appreciate those recommendations. I think the emphasis around expanding technology is very important. It has many facets in terms of software development, in terms of hardware procurement, in terms of capacity building, in terms of change management. It's definitely one of the issues that we are focusing on. Business continuity plans has been a lesson for us. And we realize that it's not just a pandemic. Anything could create a situation where we need to know that we can continue to deliver these essential services. And I think also eco-friendly transactions. We've always talked about being more eco-friendly. We've talked about trying to be more sensitive to our environment. And we've learned ways in which we can continue to do our business without doing more harm to our community. So from the perspective of the sector, it's really about ensuring that we continue to deliver, that we continue to administer justice, but at the same time ensure that everybody is kept safe, everybody is protected from illness, but also from the other incidences that occur in a situation like this. And that's where our focus has been under the COVID situation. And going forward, the lessons that we have learned and that we are taking forward in our next planning and implementation cycles. I think my time is almost up, and so I will just stop there for now. And Daniel, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for not just responding ably to the points that were raised by the Castle centerpiece presentation of Mercy, but also looking at the response that was given by the first discussant, and also speaking into the poll question. What I liked very much about what you said is the fact that people had to change, and the JLOS institutions really had to pick a leaf from other institutions that were adopting change and going ahead to make certain changes. And it is true that ICT has become such an important factor in this conversation. So thank you once again for that. Now, I would like to let people know, whoever is listening in, that the Q&A section on Zoom is available. Please let us hear your questions, let us hear your comments, and our panelists are invited to even respond to them immediately instead of waiting for the plenary. It is fine for you to do so. We shall now go to our second poll question. We'll go to our second poll question. Let me get it. Yes, our second poll question. The second poll question for those listening in on Facebook is as follows. Should access to PPEs and ability to observe SOPs, that is standard operating procedures, access to personal protective equipment and standard operating procedures during a pandemic be treated as a human rights issue? I'll say that again. Should access to PPEs and ability to observe SOPs during a pandemic be treated as a human rights issue? I'll ask as many of you as possible to respond to that poll question, and then we shall go to the next issue. I'll ask also the technical team, should you find any question via Facebook, please bring it to my attention, and maybe we can post it in the chat room so that our panelists can be able to pick it up as well. Thank you very much. Let us wait for the polls to be conducted. And as the polls are being conducted, we shall begin to prepare for the presentation or a response from Dr. Sylvia Namubiru. I hope you are ready, Dr. Sylvia, as we wait here. All right, so our polls are out. These are the results. Should access to PPEs and ability to observe standard operating procedures during a pandemic be treated as a human rights issue? 88% said yes, 4% said no, another 4% said yes, but only for as long as a vaccine or treatment has not been found. And then another 4% said no, not if access to prevention to other diseases is not cared for. Not if access to prevention to other diseases is not cared for. Thank you very much for responding to that poll question. I now have the honor to invite our next presenter, and I'll just read out her short bio right now for all of us. All right. Dr. Sylvia Namubiru Mukasa is the Chief Executive Officer of the Legal Aid Service Providers Network, LASPNet. She's a senior advocate and also a former judicial officer, I think rising to the rank of Chief Magistrate. Sylvia has served on the senior management team in other organizations like the Uganda Law Society, and has been a trainer on access to justice and legal aid at the national and community level. Ms. Namubiru is an expert in child rights and served as a technical advisor to Uganda Child Rights NGO Network, as well as the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development during the enactment of the Children's Amendment Act 2016. A member of the steering committee of the Justice for Children and a board member of the Citizens Coalition on Electoral Democracy in Uganda, CEDU, he has widely published articles on A21 and human rights in the local dailies, and is a regular panelist on both television and radio shows, and currently she's spearheading the enactment of the National Legal Aid. Recently been awarded an honorary doctorate in theology and humanities from the Zoe Theological University, USA, and she holds a master's degree in development studies, majoring in human rights and social justice. ISIS Netherlands, a degree in law from Makerere University, a diploma in legal practice, and also has several certificates in human rights and project management. I'll also quicken to add that Dr. Sylvia Namubiru is a very active member of Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity, and we are very happy to associate with her there. So welcome, Dr. Namubiru. You have 15 minutes to respond not just to the centerpiece, but also to any issues that may be raised in the chat room that may have been raised by your fellow discussant. Go ahead, Dr. Namubiru. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruhweza, for this opportunity and for the kind introduction. I would also like to take special recognition of my fellow panelists, my seniors, Dr. George Bamugemeire and Ms. Rachel Odoi. I'd like to appreciate in a special way our think tank today, CASO, and the team, Dr. Magara, and also our presenter today, Mercy. Thank you so much for a very elaborate presentation that has given us a wide spectrum of the opportunities, but also the challenges in the justice land order sector. I would like to associate with most of the presentations by Mercy, but also with the fellow discussants, because they have added value to the already paper that has been given to us. However, I would like to hasten to add, especially in the areas that were not probably much elaborated, but alluded to, and add that when we are looking at the justice land order sector, Dr. Bamugemeire said we consider administration of justice. I would like us to add on the component of access to justice. The justice land order sector is here to ensure access to justice for all. And therefore, I'm going to interrogate COVID-19 and its challenges and its opportunities within that kind of parameters of access to justice, which we all wanted to see enhanced and improved irrespective of COVID-19. Access to justice in simplicity, without going into jargon, would mean that the laws are in place, the laws that enable access to justice, starting from our major law, which is the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. And that these laws are well known by those that intend to use them, and that they are not ambiguous. And that in addition, the laws have the framework or the structures to enforce them. And that is the justice land order sector. With all its human capital, with all its offices, or what we call the structures, and with all its abilities in terms of skilling, in terms of competencies to be able to deliver and administer justice in a timely manner. But again, the remedies that come from the courts of law or from those who do administration of justice should be able to be enforced or enforceable, the remedies. But then there should be those to help those who want to get remedies from the courts of law access the various institutions. And so when I'm looking at access to justice during COVID-19, when I'm looking at what the justice and the sector put in place, I am looking at it in that angle and with those lenses. We all noted that, as Mercy has said, that this COVID-19 was devastating world over, and none of us was prepared. And so when we mention the preparedness of the justice land order sector, we look at the justice law and order sector in the context of the whole world, in the context of the government of Uganda. So if the government of Uganda was not prepared enough to face the challenge or the pandemic, then we don't also expect the justice land order sector to have been as much prepared, because the justice law and order sector derives this mandate from the National Development Plan. And then we have the Institutional Development Plan. So if the National Development Plan missed the areas of risk management in as far as pandemics are concerned, then definitely the justice and order sector was as well responding to the issues as they arose. And therefore that caused a lot of challenges. And as Mercy has mentioned them, I don't want to repeat them. And however, I will go deeper to elaborate on the critical challenge that I think, again, relates to what I have mentioned, access to justice. And that was the fact that many people, women and children that were facing domestic violence, women and children that were facing issues to do with maternity, access rights, and others could not easily access the services. A moment, please. Let me just switch on there. My battery was running low. Sorry about that. Could not be able to access the amenities that they were expected to be having. But I want us to draw it closer to us in terms of legal services and the impact or the challenges it created to those who are looking for access to justice. Execution of court orders were put on the hold. Land transactions were put on the hold. only emergencies would be handled. So now across, and as Marcel put it, the most vulnerable people suffered. Land, you know, this was an opportunity for the opportunists to evict many people around this period. We had the scenarios of Mubende, where people were even hatched, and others that I won't be able to mention here. When it came to domestic violence, because people were seated at home, while the Uganda police reported increasing cases of violence, those are the ones that they managed to get access to. But you realize that many people were in the lockdown, and even when they were assaulted, they could not run to the nearest police because they were supposed to be at home. And the LC's structure that was supposed to be empowered properly, of course, they lacked resources to be able to respond to within the community to address the issue that was affecting the people. And that also now takes us thinking as the justice and order sector. It is a challenge, but also an opportunity to build upon. That how better can we work with these frameworks at the local level to be able to respond to issues that affect the ordinary person in times of pandemics such as this one. I want us to come closer to the Constitution and some of the articles that should not have been violated during this period. And I would like to draw our attention to Article 14 of the Constitution, which prohibition of derogation from particular human rights and freedoms. And I want us to read verbatim that article to take us through and understand the challenge that the sector was faced with, and therefore we needed to address as we are going forward to appreciate the future. Notwithstanding in this Constitution, there shall be no derogation from the enjoyment of the following rights and freedoms: the freedom from torture and cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment. And I'll add on the right to fair hearing. Now, we noted during the COVID, and from our perspective, that many people were being arrested because of violating the curfew regulation directives and other standard operating procedures. And because the courts were operating thinly, many were just remanded. They were not given the opportunity to apply for bail. Actually, they were more made vulnerable to the pandemic than even when they would stay home. The lawyers were stopped from operating as essential. Then, maybe until after when 30 whatever tickets we are given. So that means the right to fair hearing was contravened, and yet it was not supposed to be one of those rights that were supposed to be safely and jealously guarded. The violation concerning inhuman and degrading treatment, people being incarcerated beyond 48 hours, people being whipped by the local defense forces and law enforcement officers. There was a lot of torture that was going on. And from that perspective, you realize that the justice, law, and order sector was challenged, especially by one of its institutions not being alive to some of those provisions that they ought to have kept and guarded safely, especially in terms of observing rule of law. Then we also noticed that, of course, the directives were coming directly from the executive. Others, like George mentioned, the other bureaucracies were dealt away with. So you find that the justice and order sector participation in this process was much more limited to programming and responding to issues around the sector, but forgetting the other component of the legal framework under which we are working. And Mercy has alluded to it. The fact that we lacked comprehensive legal framework to safeguard and ensure that some of those were added to. The other component that came out and challenged the sector more, we already challenged with it. But during this period, it was expounded to the extent of losing lives. This is corruption. We realized that many, especially those that would violate the standard operating procedures, or those that would go against the directives, like the border writers, borders were confiscated, or motorcycles. And as a result, it led to some of the people causing death. We hear the case of Masaka. It is one case, but it's challenged the sector so much that it should be looked at as one of those risks that should have been averted. I've already mentioned the issue of domestic violence, but I would like us to look at it in a different dimension, that while women and children were considered to be most affected during this and the domestic violence, but we also saw another form of violence. We all know the culture that men don't speak, men don't talk. But because men, there was an issue of economic disempowerment. When many of those who earn from hand to mouth, could not operate. They could not feed their families, the taxi drivers, the border, those who go for market, you know, those day-to-day businessmen and women, the saloon, you know, none of those could fend for their families. And the government mechanisms to provide for food were very limited or challenged. So what happened? We saw masculinization of men in homes, men becoming affected by psychological violence because they cannot provide for their families. So that we have a component of economic justice. And that is what also the justice land order sector has to consider in terms of planning as we move forward. How do we plan for economic justice? Because it's also a causation for some of the issues that we saw coming out strongly during the COVID period and continue. Having said more and more about the challenges, which I know my colleagues also have alluded to, I now go to the opportunities. Yes, we all know that COVID-19, in as much as it came with this challenge, it created a new opportunity. Now we call it new normal, the new normal. We worked from home. Originally, employers thought that people can only deliver when they come physically at work. But we could see many organizations up to now, development partners have not come to offices. But many of us received the support, resources, when we are just working online. And therefore, that also means that the employment space also got challenged. It's an opportunity, but also it caused the organization to think on essential workers. So the new normal brought in place many innovations. For example, on our site, we had the bicycle lawyering. While the lawyers were not considered essential, we had to have a rapid response team. Some of them would walk, some of them would ride their bicycles. In Uganda here, people think it's only we drive vehicles, and therefore bicycles are for the poor. And yet, if we can borrow examples of the Scandinavian countries, bicycles are more expensive as vehicles. So on our side, we adopted the bicycle lawyering. We had situations of situational rooms. We received many people who wanted food, and we could coordinate and ensure that people get services in terms of using only the situational room, counseling, psychosocial support. Again, the sector should put into consideration those components because justice should be holistic, not only having legal lenses. We saw many organizations, especially from the side of the civil society, providing call center services, first responder mechanisms, where vulnerable communities would use free toll lines to be able to talk to lawyers, and they are given advice, and they are rescued to go to shelters. Video and telephone conferencing. We saw many legal aid service providers doing alternative dispute resolution on telephone and getting resolution of issues and even memorandums of understandings using video because clients could not work. Mobile vans within the community for those who could move, especially those that were co-opted to the task forces of the district. Then the use of online platforms that we have already seen. So all those were innovations in addition to what the court gave us, which is the virtual and also the speeding up of the automation. We are a conservative community that is slow to adapting to technology, but COVID-19 has made us and pushed us to begin to think like Matt has talked to us about using digital tools. Yes, it is challenging, but we are adapting. However, it is also having challenges, as we shall see in the recommendations. So Mercy has given us a number of recommendations. I also associate with them, but I would like to add in a recommendation that she has not emphasized. She's emphasized it, the public-private partnership. I think it's very important for the non-state actors to work very closely with the government. And when you look at the components of the community policing, the community justice the monitoring and see that there is a reduction in crime. That one you can only do it together when there is that kind of relationship between government and those who are on the ground that are providing services. I would like also to emphasize the point and the need to have community justice strengthened within the justice sector. Rachel is talking about not only online access to justice, but also physical access to justice. But we also know that there are certain communities that strongly believe in their informal justice mechanisms. And we look at components of like resolving of family disputes, land langos at a customary level, and many more other kind of nature of cases that can be handled at the community level. We have noted that the community respect their elders, the community respect their religious persons, the community respect the local council in as well as it's a formal justice, but it's more of at a community level. So we need to strengthen those justice structures. If during lockdown, the local council have been well equipped, if they had been trained, if they had been given resources, people would easily walk into those homes of the local councils or those structures where they are, and they're able to resolve. Local councils would easily run to the homes where there was injustices, especially domestic related, and they would have addressed them. So for me, the recommendation that I want to emphasize is that while we have the formal justice structures, which are also bedeviled by backlog, limited human resource, it is very important to strengthen the community justice. The recommendation to invest in ICT should not only be ICT, but a huge ICT investment in terms of, because we may look at only the urban courts, but what is going to happen to the community courts that are at the lower levels? So we need to invest in ICT, but also make ICT more friendly. The internet is damn expensive. We are talking about the poor and vulnerable community. We are talking about 80% of Ugandans who cannot afford the services of a lawyer. We are talking about many Ugandans that are living from hand to mouth. And therefore, you talk about data. If you are going to have a virtual court and you have to have witnesses, for how long will those witnesses be online? I've just been here in my office. As you see now, I'm in a kind of a dark room where there is internet miles away from the rhino. The resident judge was telling me he is overseeing 12 districts and is only one resident judge. I want to differ slightly from my senior, Dr. Bamgemere, when he said, okay, we don't need many judges, or okay, we should not speak about investing in judges, but yes, we may not speak more in investing into judicial officers, but still we have to rationalize. We have to equalize. Because like, if I can give that example of High Court in Arua, which has 12 districts, one resident judge, the access roads are very, very difficult. The chairperson LOC3 at that legal aid open outreach was able to confess and say, my Lord Justice Issa, I'm seeing you for the first time. And if I'm seeing you for the first time, it means all my leaders that I'm here with today, LOC2, LOC1, Chief Parish, they're all seeing you for the first time. And you see, this is Rhino Camp community, host community, not Rhino Camp, where the refugees are located. So when Rachel speaks about mobile court outreach, that is also a serious issue to emphasize. But also the internet, the Ministry of ICT. We have countries like Rwanda near here, where internet is free. But in Uganda, internet is the most expensive service. That one also we need to look at it. Awareness raising. Awareness raising is very important for the justice and order sector. If we are to promote community responsible people that respect the rule of law, drive according to the lens, they don't galvanize, they don't disturb the neighbor's peace. People need to know the laws and rules that govern their coexistence. When we go to other vulnerable communities, where there is increasing vice of sexual gender-based violence, where it has become a scourge, where it has become a pandemic itself. Northern Uganda, Acholi sub-region, babies are being defiled, fathers defiling their own children. 90% of cases in the criminal justice system are defilement and rape. Then our approach should not only be legal approach, but also social-based approach. What is happening? Maybe there is something that needs to be worked on in this community and understand, is it a culture issue? Is it the effect of the war? We need to think through all those aspects, especially where sexual gender-based violence is increasing. What kind of strategies are we using for awareness creation? Risk management, quickly, as I conclude. Risk management, of course, cuts across. It's not only with the justice and order sector. I believe this opportunity or this COVID-19 has taught us to know that we should not only plan for only the obvious risks, but even those are risks that we don't even anticipate to happen. We should begin to think broadly so that we put into plan all those unexpected risks like this one we had. Human capital is not only about increasing numbers, increasing finances, skilling. We looked at LODUs. They themselves became a pandemic with the community until civil society spoke, until the UAPDF also came up, realized the mistake, and corrected it. So the control of the justice sector and its institutions, how do they bring into their ambit other institutions that help, like the UPDF? How are they controlling them? So we may come up with the human resource, increasing the law enforcement, but they themselves become a risk to the community. We lost lives, and these lives will never be recovered, more than even sometimes with the COVID. We lost people we are maimed. So as I conclude, I want to emphasize the fact that it is very important, broadly as a sector, to look into those areas that challenged us during COVID. We look at the innovations and how we can sustain the innovations. So the sustainability plan is a very important factor, but also the preventive plan is also a value addition in order to holistically provide accessible, affordable justice to all Ugandans. I thank you so much, Doctor, for moderating us and for all the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sylvia Nambiru, for well-elaborated conversation and response. It is very clear that COVID-19 brought some unexpected challenges to us, but at the same time, I like the fact that you highlight how many issues were raised, or many responses and innovations came up. For example, bicycle lawyering, the situation room, support being given through call centers, ADR on the phone, and through video conferencing. I think these are huge innovations and opportunities for those who are working in the justice, law, and order sector. And of course, the challenges still remain for us. So I thank you very much for that intervention. We shall now go to our next poll. Just a second. I don't know whether our special guest has arrived as yet. Technical team, is there any response regarding our special guest?
Daniel, I've been there since.
Oh, okay, very good, very good.
Yeah,
thank you very much, Your Lordship. We are very happy to have you with us. Maybe we can take the first poll, this poll question, and then after we shall invite our special guest to speak to us. So the poll is, which intervention would have the greatest impact in addressing the challenges that JLOS faces? Which intervention would have the greatest impact in addressing the challenges which the justice, law and order sector faces? Infrastructure and ICT enhancement is option 1. Addressing the gaps in human resource is option 2. Improvements in the legal and ethical frameworks is option 3. And then addressing case backlog is option number 4. We shall wait for your intervention there as we prepare to have the talk from our special guest. Okay, those have been our results. According to the results, improvements in the legal and ethical frameworks takes priority as the intervention which would have the greatest impact in addressing the challenges that the JLOS sector faces. Improvements in the legal and ethical frameworks. Number 2 would be infrastructure and ICT enhancement at 28%. The first one was at 40%. Number 3, addressing the gaps in human resource at 20%. And number 4, addressing case backlog with 12%. Thank you very much for that question, for responding to our third poll question. Now, I would like to inform our panelists once again that there are some questions which are being presented for you in the Q&A, and I'll ask our panelists, if you can, please respond to them as the conversation continues, both in the Q&A section as well as in this chat section. For example, I see Lucy Ladira has said, in terms of SGBV, that is sexual gender-based violence, it is indeed the way Rachel states it, because at June last year, the Uganda Police Force report had 5.2 more cases than this year, meaning that there were some more cases reported last year. Dr. George Pamugemereire, there is a question for you in Q&A. Please look at it, as well as any other that you may want to respond. Let the conversations continue even as we proceed. I now have the greatest honor this morning to introduce the Honorable Lady Justice Jane Francis Abodo, who is a judge of the High Court of Uganda, as well as the newly appointed newly appointed Director of Public Prosecutions at the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions. She is the first female DPP in Uganda, and we truly celebrate her. She was appointed in March 2020. As DPP, she determines criminal charges, prosecutes in courts of law, and directs which investigation may have to happen when we talk about prosecution-led investigations. Previously, she was appointed as a judge in 2018, making her the first female judge and the first judge from the Karamoja region. While at the bench, she was attached to the criminal division and oversaw what we are talking about right now, sexual and gender-based violence cases, or otherwise the acronym is SGBV, as well as plea bargaining in the judiciary. She'll tell us a little bit more about plea bargaining. Justice Jane Frances Abodo worked with the ODPP for 19 years in various capacities before she was made a judge. Between 2010 and 2018, she headed the anti-corruption department at the rank of Senior Assistant DPP, where she successfully prosecuted a substantial number of corruption cases and kept the conviction rate at over 90%. In 2015, she was recognized by the Uganda Law Society as the best female prosecutor of the year. She has a master's degree from Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. She has postgraduate training in legal practice from our Law Development Center. She has a postgraduate certificate in research methods, a postgraduate diploma in human resource management from Uganda Management Institute, and in addition, she has trained extensively in anti-corruption, money laundering, financial investigations, asset recovery, and sexual and gender-based violence. I would also want to add that Justice Jane Frances Abodo is a member of Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity, and we are extremely proud to associate with her. It now gives me pleasure, untold pleasure, to welcome her to speak to us. Your Lordship, we await to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I want to thank the team at the Center for Advanced Strategic Leadership for facilitating this webinar at such an opportune time. Given the impact of COVID-19 on the criminal justice system as a whole, I particularly want to thank Dr. James Magara, the chairman of CASO, you, Dr. Daniel, and Kathy at the organizing office for extending this invitation to the office of the DPP. And of course, to the very able discussants. With the future being shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic and humanity's responses to it, critical insights are more important than ever. The business as usual is not going to be enough. Like Dr. Bamgemere said, the window of the time within which to act is really closing fast. And I want to, before I go into what I needed to say, to just thank Mercy for the detailed presentation that she gave. I just thought after our presentation, I should just be introduced and then I bow out. She mentioned about the technological gaps, not working in silos. And Dr. Sylvia, of course, talked to us about the not looking at the legal. Actually, when I was at the bench for the 2 years, when I was active for the 2 years, I actually realized that for SGBV cases, we should not actually only look at the cases as legal problems. We should be looking at some of them as social problems. We should be able to look at some of the accused persons as victims at the same time. So that's how I just looked at it and said, that's how to go about it. Because if we do that, then we are just repeating the cycle. This accused person may have been a victim at the time, and then look at the father defiling their own daughters. Are they really okay? Is that a crime, or does he need to go somewhere else for help? So and I also want to agree with Dr. Bamberere when he says that how we look at countries where crime is very low, it just stems from the fact of how people are educated, how people are educated from the time of nursery, even just the rhymes that are being taught at the nursery school. It just tells a lot. some of you must have, I didn't attend nursery, some of you must have attended nursery. You remember the songs that you were singing, Baba, Black Sheep, the things of snow, and the things which are really out of context, when we should have been educating children how to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, we are saying, let's educate the youth, the children, about all these, the evils of crime. And then we, at the same time, punish the adults for committing such crimes. That's how we can really get to the bottom of reducing on crime in our country. COVID-19 has really changed everything from crime to policy. Legal systems must keep up at the same time. COVID-19 pandemic will also have far-reaching implications for justice, not just in Uganda, but all over the world. The Office of the DPP, being one of the key stakeholders funded by JELOS, is pleased to work in collaboration with other institutions in paving way to the new normal. Like Mercy put it, that it is no longer time to actually work in silos. It is now time for us to work together, you know, break down those silos, otherwise we shall not manage. And together with the JELOS Secretariat, we have had several engagements on how to have coordinated approach and response. And you can agree with me that with the COVID-19, we realized that our response should be, of course, quick, should be immediate, but should be reasonable at the same time, and should be proportionate, you know. So the JELOS Secretariat has helped us in this, and we have had a number of engagements, and we developed SOPs together on how to handle sessions. We have had mobile courts. We have handled plea bargains in the prisons, and between just only June and July, we handled about 506 plea bargains in the prisons, and we have also had to go to the remand homes to handle cases in the remand homes. And also now we are actually trying out handling normal sessions. It's happening at the Entebbe court by the Honorable Justice Kwesiga. We have had to have staggered court schedules to avoid large numbers coming, you know, like maybe only 3 accused persons per day, so that we have a limited number of witnesses. We don't allow the public, so that we release the pressure in the prisons. You know, the prisons have been in a lockdown from the 18th March. They have never really opened. Before then, prisons used to have visits like 3 times in a week. They would have visitors, but from 18th March, there are no visitors. So there's a lot of unrest there. So we thought we should really come in with the JELOS actors. We have also made some gradual and drastic adjustments in the last 7 or 8 months to match the SOPs set by government. And the Office of the DPP is not left out. We have had to have interventions, or the Ministry of Health Circular Letters 6 and 7 of 2020 required that only 30% of staff should be in the office premises at the time. So the ODPP has implemented this. So we have 70% working remotely. And this is what Mercy was saying, that we have technology gaps. When we say that 70% are working remotely, for us in the ODPP, we're actually saying 70% of the people are just sitting at home, because we don't have the capacity. We don't have the capacity to have them work at home. We have the enhanced use of technology, of course, for court appearances. It has also woken us up to procuring laptops for every prosecutor. This is the opportunity that we have taken. We have had UN Women and the Australian Embassy have come to our aid to have some of the laptops provided for the Office of the DPP. Like Mercy said, budget adjustments, we had to talk to JELOS and say, please adjust our budgets, and let's have more laptops so that we can have the prosecutors work at home. And then, of course, there has been discontinuing of transportation of accused persons to courthouses. Instead, we introduced the mobile courts, which has been alluded by most of the discussants. We have also, as an office, decided that we should not prosecute low-level offenses. Sometimes during on the 18th March, there was a lockdown. There were many people. And of course, the ODPP, the judiciary, the legal fraternity, they were actually non-essential at the time. So you find that most of the people who appeared in court just were remanded. So there was over 4,000 people remanded for low-level offenses, really working after 5 p.m. and maybe opening their small shops, women selling fruits after 5 p.m. So as an office, we decided that let's not prosecute these cases, and all of them were actually withdrawn from the system. This was just to decongest the prisons. We have also had a conversation with police to deprioritize arresting of certain offenses, and they've been doing that, because if they were arresting everyone who was committing an offense, would have been overwhelmed. So most of the offenses, most of the low-level offenders have been really cautioned and left to go. And then we have given priority in handling serious cases, like cases of domestic violence, cases involving children, family court cases, criminal cases for the incarcerated, like we have introduced mobile courts in the prisons, and also having staggered court schedules. And we have given more vigilance in handling complaints. Contact information is visibly displayed to enable the public access the ODPP services without physical interaction. And this has been overwhelming, because most of the people now send their complaints online. And as ODPP, we have also constituted a high-level task force to case with all committed cases. We have had about 4 regions where we have already done case weeding. About 1,300 cases have been completed, and we have withdrawn those ones which we think are not really not having enough evidence, or they were hurriedly committed. We have decided that we withdraw them from the system. This is just to decongest the prisons and the ODPP, and we want to cover the whole country. So maybe by end of this year, we should have covered the whole country, so that the only cases which remain in the system are cases which are going to take off. And the ODPP was also able to provide frontline staff with the PPEs, which we got from UN Women, which we got from UNICEF. And we have had constant communication among key stakeholders. We have had key stakeholders at the JLO Secretariat, together with the judiciary, the police, the prisons. And we have had to balance the health risk and the public safety risk. It is a big challenge to do that, because then we have had to have communication, we have had to have coordination among the members. Otherwise, then we shall have uncoordinated movement of troops on the field. So our office, as the ODPP, we have engaged in both response and prevention of crimes. Before, we were looking at only prosecution, but now we have had to go and say, no, we're not going to be on the receiving end anymore. We need to try and handle these cases at the roots. What causes this? Should we be going out to tell people that, how your children are being defiled is when you leave your children at home with your relatives, with your neighbors? You shouldn't do that. So we have had a number of staff appear on TV, appear on radio talk shows to educate the public about SGBV cases, anti-corruption, homicides, and plea bargains. And we have also developed the information, education, and communication materials like flyers, which are disseminated to the public. This contain what like the ODPP does. It contains toll-free numbers. It also contains our official email contact. This is how now people are able to actually continue giving us complaints. We continue receiving complaints. We have also had to consider operational changes to deal with effectively yet compassionately. As a prosecutor, you are not only going to be looking at the crime and looking at, we have to be, and especially now that most of the offenses that are committed now are actually poverty-related crimes. So we have had to step back a little bit and say, now these crimes, you shouldn't object to bail in some of these crimes. We shouldn't really press for custodial sentences. They should be pursued as a last resort. We should use diversion more. We encourage police to use diversion more so that we relieve the system. Criminals, as you have been reading in the papers, criminals are now seeking to exploit the public health crisis and this economic aftermath. We have already had reports of criminal networks intensifying their operations in the fields of cybercrime. We may be locked down, but our phones are not locked down, our computers are not locked down, and the criminals are very fast in this. We have had corruption hiking, we have had human trafficking, and as we speak now, crimes against society's most vulnerable are rising, like alluded by most of the discussants. Domestic violence, child abuse, such crimes must be effectively prosecuted and their victims treated with care and compassion. And I'm just looking at it, just to conclude, I'm just looking at the imperative. It is really imperative upon us, all of us, to confront the pandemic's profound long-term risks by us taking the leading role as guardians of the rule of law. I'm also looking at it that our response as the jealous sector should be reasonable, should be immediate, and should be proportionate. Because, as I said, we should be able to balance the health risk and also the human public. If as a prosecutor you go to court, you are not going to say you have to release this person because we don't want congestion in the prisons. We also have to balance the public safety at the same time. It's a challenge, and it requires communication, it requires coordination among the stakeholders. That's why this conversation like this one is very, very important. And I want once again to thank CASO for organizing this conversation. And I want to thank the discussants. I want to thank Mercy for the extensive presentation that she gave at the beginning. And I want to thank all the members, everyone online following. And thank you so much. God bless you for God and my country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Lordship, for that very extensive interrogation of the key issues pertaining this debate, and also helping us appreciate the key role that is played by the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions in the justice, law, and order sector. Actually, when many people talk about law, the first thing they think about is prison, they think about police, then they think about lawyers. Sometimes they think about us lawyers in very unfavorable terms. But thank you for helping those who are listening in to be able to appreciate the unique challenges that come with not only your office, but also with the whole sector and the different nuances that are available in that sector. Thank you very much. Now we are going to have a plenary session. We are going to ask our panelists to be as attentive as they can while we listen in to some of the comments and questions that may be asked. I'll ask the technical team to assist me here. I hope our panelists have been able to follow on the Q&A as well as the chat room to pick some of the issues, but also to have other responses you may want to give regarding the what your fellow panelists have said. Okay, so is there anybody who would like to ask a question? I'm going to go to the participants and see if anyone wants to ask a question, please raise your hand and ask the question, and we shall be able to identify you. Or you can still post the question and we shall go ahead. Okay, I'll start by reading out something as you organize yourselves. Somebody called Marilyn Apio says, I have a contribution towards the way forward for the previous speaker. I'm here in the Netherlands. The lawyers, without being told and paid, handle backlog cases and free services, and this has moved them very far. If people are dedicated, it can happen. Marilyn, I don't know if you are available or if it is possible to make it to help you speak to us and give us some insights in that regard. While the technical team follow up with Marilyn, I'll go to Mr. Samuel Siminyu. Samuel Siminyu has a comment to Dr. George Bamugemereire, who he says, thank you for the passionate and lucid presentation. The example you used from the Scandinavian countries on using education to address justice, law, and order challenges was intriguing. But don't you think this needs to be contextualized to include, for existence, the socioeconomic support systems that everyone benefits from in those countries? I'm informed that essential services in those regions of the world are available to all citizens at the cost of the state. Taxes are high to take care of everyone's basic needs, that is education, health, food, shelter, etc. In that case, the teaching is exemplified in the practice. How does that compare with Uganda, where survival is for the fiercest? I think he meant fittest. The poor are left to their fate in every respect. The most powerful prosper by robbing from the poor, and the public by evading taxes. The untouchable do not face the consequences of lawlessness, etc. Technical team, is there a response from Marilyn? Have you been able to pick her up? Technical team? Okay. Dr. George, would you like to make a response to this comment?
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan, for that contribution and for that question. I think briefly what I would say is that we need to make a deliberate journey towards getting to the underlying drivers of the challenges that Africa faces. There are things that are cost neutral that can be done by all or any of us, but only if we deliberately start that journey. The countries we are talking about started this journey many, many years ago. They identified the daunting problems of the society and drew up a plan. What do we do? And what can be the long-term benefits of a plan, which may include doing things where probably the results may not be realized in our lifetime, but somebody has to start that journey. And that's why I identified the issue of education, that the people of the Scandinavian countries were able, I don't even think they understood the full extent of what they were doing, but I think they said, what is the main driver of and long-term strategy for addressing problems like crime or keeping people safe, human rights? He said, let us implement the neighbor principle. Do not do to others what you don't want to be done to you. How do we implement that? And then they started to say, let us get people, capture people at a very early age when they've just been born. And I think that's what we really need to do, to start doing certain things, not for the now, because right now we are driven by the now. And the person raised the question, right, so many challenges of now, survival, existence, and so on. But can we step back and say, can we also look at the long-term battles ahead of us draw strategies which our great-grandchildren will look at and say, this was a fundamental issue that was addressed, or at least proposed by the people before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. George Bamgemereire. There's two other questions here. The first one from Christina Lupo is to the panelists. Thank you for a very enlightening session. I seek your perspectives on the legal framework for handling emergencies and specifically pandemics. Should we have had a state of emergency declared, or did we do just fine with the Ministry of Health statutory instruments? Dr. Sylvia, do you think you could respond to this?
Thank you, Dr. Rueza. Let me try to respond to it. But although the answer would be with government to know whether we should have had either. But I'll try from the perspective of law. There are situations when the government can be allowed to put in place policies and laws that would normally not be permitted under normal circumstances. And the state is allowed to do that to promote safety or to provide safety and protection of their citizens. The framework for state of emergency is provided for when there are natural disasters, when there is civil unrest, when there is armed conflict, when there is a pandemic. And I think COVID-19 qualifies for a pandemic. We all know it's a pandemic because it's affected almost the word of a majority of people were affected, and any other biosecurity risk. And therefore, under normal circumstances or under what we saw, probably the government would have opted for the state of emergency. But maybe the government in its own wisdom and for reasons best known, they opted to use the statutes under Ministry of Health. But even then, even if the state of emergency would have been there, our constitution protects and safeguards the human rights. Certain human rights, like I've said, Article 44, they are non-derogable rights. Freedom from torture and the right to a fair hearing. So that means even if Parliament had, there have been a state of emergency declared, then the Parliament confirms it, it will still have required that we observe those particular safeguards, which are related to access to justice, as I have mentioned. So as to whether we should have had a state of emergency, on the side of just explaining, I think, yes, the situation provided the minimum requirements to have it. But as to whether we had it, again, that is now government to respond, because they could have had reasons why they opted to use that option.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, for that response. I'll ask Rachel Odoi to also make a response to that particular question. As she prepares herself, let me give Marilyn Apio a chance. What was happening in the Netherlands? Marilyn?
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, thank you. The suggestion I was bringing is, by the time I came here, I already found it in the system. They set aside a Thursday and a Friday for both backlogs and free services. So everyone is allocated 1 hour. So you who has a case, you make sure you talk within the 1 hour, and then the lawyer gives you the free service. And according to them, it says it has really, really, really helped them, and they have moved on. They have very few cases of crimes. And now with the current lockdown, the law is just obvious in your face. So maybe also us back home, we have a problem with keeping law. I'm seeing the advantage here is automatically people just keep law. Automatic. But when it comes to a court case or lawyers, the system is there. Every Thursday and Friday, everybody's there. It is on first come, first serve through their website, which you register, and then you know you're sitting there. It's a free service. It is for 1 hour, and you are handled. Even the allocated lawyer to you makes sure that they start and finish your case. You don't have to come back again, come back again, come back again. That is what I wanted to contribute as far as backlogs are concerned and so many other cases.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. I truly appreciate that you have logged in and given us some insights from the Netherlands. I'm sure we can do something about it even in Uganda and improve what we already have right now. All right. Is Rachel available to respond?
Yes, I'm here. Yes,
okay, Rachel,
I'm here.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did hear the question.
Okay, please.
I think Dr. Sylvia covered most of it, but maybe just to add my own voice to that. When you look at the COVID-19 situation and you look at Article 110 of the Constitution, which provides for a state of emergency, it would fit into the context of a situation under which a state of emergency can be called. But it's not mandatory. So it says the president may call for a state of emergency. And of course, there's a whole process of cabinet and parliament. So that discussion would have taken place with the executive on whether or not it was necessary to call that state of emergency. And I guess the decision that was taken was that it wasn't. So it could have been an option, but in the wisdom of the executive, they felt it was not necessary to do so. And the regulations that were put in place provided a framework for the health actors and then also the justice actors to be able to deal with the situation. In addition to the regulations, statutory instruments under the Public Health Act, we also had we had directives from the Chief Justice in the context of the judiciary to guide the judicial officers on how court matters would be handled. There were directives from the different other JLOS actors within police and within prisons. So it would have been an option, but the executive on assessing the situation probably determined that it wasn't necessary, and we've been able to operate with the regulations that we have been given. So as Dr. Sylvia said, it's something that is considered. It could have been an option, but we've worked with what we have had so far. Maybe since I just wanted to respond also to the issue raised by Mercy Apio, I think she was Mercy Apio, on the situation of the Netherlands. And I think it also goes back to what Dr. Bamugemerere was saying about the situation in Scandinavia. And I think one of the attendees mentioned also that the context has to be taken into consideration. I think in addition to context, one thing that we really have to push for, and one of the areas that we are emphasizing as the justice sector, is enforcement of the laws and people to know that there are consequences to actions. I think that's one area where we still have a bit of work to do as Ugandans. A lot of things are done because we don't see the immediate consequence. Whereas in many other societies, the consequences are immediate and they are real. If you're breaking the law and you have a criminal record, it's going to affect you in very many ways. And your record is clearly available for anyone to see. So if you, for example, if you have numerous traffic offenses, there's a possibility of losing your license. If you have certain types of offenses, your credit is affected. So having those consequences, and that's one of the areas that we are looking at. Not because we want to make life difficult, but because it's essential that you have some order and that people respect. So together with educating people, because even when you teach people, but if there is no consequence, there's a tendency for people to relax. So it's a balance between public education and having people consent to comply with all the rules and regulations, but then also ensuring that for those who consistently refuse to comply, that there are sanctions. I think it's the only way in which you can have order. And so that's why you see, for example, you're hearing the prisons are empty in parts of Europe. They're being converted into other types of facilities. You hear some of them have open prisons where you come in on Monday and you leave, or you go home for the weekend, knowing that you're going to come back because of a culture that has grown. And that's the culture that we want to see growing in Uganda, a culture where we agree to comply. We have a consensus amongst all of us that we're going to comply with the rule of law. We are going to follow the guidelines. We're going to follow the directives that are given. And then it reduces the need for the coercive measures that the justice sector is usually accused of taking. Those measures are happening now because we are not willingly complying. So it's really for us to find that balance so that we can then improve our society collectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for that intervention. Rose Wakikona asks, I'm concerned about the archaic laws under which we are operating as a country, especially for social issues. We have the COVID-19 pandemic being managed under the Public Health Act, which was enacted in 1935 and prescribes criminal sanctions to handle public health issues. This fundamentally affects access to health care since it does not address human rights issues. We also have laws that would address some of our concerns, like the National Health Insurance Bill and Sexual Offences Bill. This obliges the state to establish shelters for survivors of SGBV that are not being prioritized. These need urgent attention. I think as a representative of JELOS, maybe Rachel, you take the first insight on this, and then maybe our chief guest, if you're still available, you could also chip in. We have archaic laws under which we are operating. Rachel?
Yeah, well, first, yes, many of our laws are quite old. That doesn't automatically make them bad, but it does maybe take them out of context, take them out of the current context. So we do have continuous processes of reviewing and amending the law. And within the sector context, that's spearheaded by the Law Reform Commission and the Ministry of Justice, the first Parliamentary Council. They spearhead a process of continuously reviewing and updating the laws of Uganda so that they're kept relevant to the current context. When you look, one of the issues has always been around criminal sanctions. What type of criminal sanctions do we impose for what type of offenses, particularly looking at petty offenses, what we consider petty offenses, and then also looking at certain categories of crime. So there's been that ongoing process, particularly to look at some of those petty offenses and decriminalizing of certain acts. So that's an ongoing process. But there's still areas where you need to retain criminal sanctions. Maybe it's the nature of the sanctions that have to be reviewed, whether you have detention or you have fines. There are times when you, like I mentioned just earlier, sometimes you need to have consequences for certain actions. But it's about how they're implemented. The DPP mentioned in her remarks that they are avoiding prosecuting everything. They decide what to prosecute, what not to prosecute. But having said that, there is a process ongoing to review the Penal Code Act and many other pieces of legislation to decriminalize certain petty offenses, to have alternative sentences for certain acts. But we still need to have some form of criminal justice structure in place. So that's something that's still ongoing. With specific areas, for example, sexual offenses, domestic violence, she mentioned some of those areas in particular. Domestic violence, of course, the law has already been passed. Sexual offenses, the law is in the offing. Even as we wait for that law to come into force, we've already started in partnership with some of our non-state partners testing the concepts of shelters, trying to have shelters in place. We've talked about the special sessions for addressing sexual and gender-based crime. And together with those special sessions, we're also looking at other support structures to support survivors of sexual and gender-based violence through the justice system and even afterwards. We have to balance that again with our culture, our customs. We've had experiences, for example, with shelters where it has had some negative effect as well on some of the survivors when it comes the time to reintegrate them back into their communities or back with their families. Sometimes the situations arise where it is difficult for that adjustment to take place. But those are details that can be worked on as we refine the law and have it enacted. So yes, it's something that is needed and something that is in process. And something that we look at as something quite urgent that needs to be done. And we are working with the different actors to have that in place and working, for example, together with our partners in civil society on having a framework for legal aid so that we are able to support people through the justice system. That includes both the legal support, but also psychosocial support, supporting witnesses who participate in the justice system, both in terms of helping them go through the legal process, but also helping them to address the impact of the crime on them as an individual and as a person. So the laws are being reformed. Many of them are now new. Where there are still archaic laws, they still have some relevance, but changes are being made to them over time. And we hope that we will be able to progressively ensure that we have a very responsive and appropriate legal framework in place. Daniel, I think you're still muted.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Your Lordship, are you with us? Are you still with us?
Yes, Daniel, I'm here.
Oh, very
Sorry.
good, very good. All right, it is well. So, Your Lordship, maybe you could also make an intervention into what Rachel has just said, but also you and I know that the Office of the DPP is operating under a constitutional provision of Article 120, if I got it right, but there is no enabling law, and that to a large extent has hindered the work of the ODPP. Could you just help us appreciate what is happening there? What are you doing to ensure that your mandate is pushed forward? And also, there was a comment raised by Madam Sylvia Nambiru, that there is inadequacy of the courts. There is inadequacy of how many people can actually access the courts. I know you don't have enough staff. What are the interventions you are making now as ODPP to address some of these unique challenges that you have? You've seen in the poll question, there is a question about infrastructure. We've seen courts operating out of small shops on the streets, especially in the suburbs. Could you just give us some insight on what is going on? What has been your experience so far? What are your plans, especially with COVID, with us for a while? Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I just wanted to make a small comment on the laws, the archaic laws. Like Rachel said, they may be archaic, but they're better than having nothing. But having said that, laws are supposed to be dynamic, because we know that crime is very dynamic. And now with technology, with a connected society, crime is even more dynamic than, the criminals are ahead of us in most of the things. Actually, the legislators are behind. After a crime has been committed, then we make the laws. So it is really sad that we are still using the 1935 Act, but that's what we have, and that is an opportunity that COVID has brought. So it has, I'm sure, put on notice all of us that we need to change, because then even societies change. We can't have a law of 1935 still fitting really very well in context with the 2020. And then so we need to really move. And also I am just thinking aloud that the laws that are being passed every other day from Parliament, I don't know whether the Parliament has ever done some kind of audit, for lack of a better word, of how are these laws, because the office of the DPP is actually mandated. We are the ones who should be checking these laws, because then if we do not charge, if we do not prefer charges under the laws that are passed, we shall never know actually whether that law is good or is bad, does it need an amendment, or it is really out of context completely. So it also wakes us up and says, every day when laws are passed, do we actually use these laws? Do we still, instead of using the Domestic Violence Act, we are still stuck in the Penal Code Act? So it is also a wake-up call for us as prosecutors in the DPP's office and other prosecutors in other organizations, that we should be able to use these laws so that we help the also parliamentarians to say, you know, the laws that you're making maybe are out of context. Having said that, I want to talk about also the shelters for survivors. I think this was mentioned by one of the, was it, I think I didn't get the name, but she mentioned about shelters. She's spot on this. Shelters for survivors. This, we really need them like yesterday. I was handling a case in 2018. That was my very first session. I was handling cases, 40 cases of children. The victims were between the age of 1.5 years and 8 years. So that was really traumatizing for me. But there was this one particular victim who traumatized me even the more, because she was, first of all, they failed to bring her to testify. So we had to, the father came to court and said that I have already given the victim to the uncle, and the victim cannot come to testify. And we have, as a family, then forgiven the accused. And this is a victim who was staying, she's an orphan, she was staying with the auntie and the sister to the father. And this auntie had a boyfriend who was a boda rider, and she was using the victim. She was actually, every time that she's, oh, sorry, I am actually in Waka's house and the siren has gone off, which means there's an emergency or there's a fire. So I really must stop here. I'm so sorry. I'll just exit the building and maybe join later. Sorry, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Your Lordship. Your safety is very important to us, so we truly understand. Thank you. Thank you. We hope we'll see the question. We hope the DPP will join us later on. Now, my question goes to Dr. George Bamgemerere. I don't know whether he is still with us. Dr. George, oh yeah. George, yes, is with us. Dr. George, we heard that during COVID, a lot of donations happened. We received a lot of money from donor partners. And then we started hearing stories that this money had disappeared or grown legs and things like that. And many of us were really challenged by hearing that money that was meant to assist, among other things, the justice, law and order sector had gone missing, or allegedly, as the lawyers say, had gone missing. Maybe you would say something about that, but also could you share with us, as the Inspectorate of Government, what are some of the things that you have specifically done during COVID? What has been your experience working during COVID, and maybe what where would you need assistance as the Inspectorate of Government? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Regarding the COVID money, we've received a complaint from the person, I think was anonymous, and the person has complained and said some of the money was misappropriated, some of the donations were misappropriated, and we've asked our team to investigate that complaint. So we don't know, we don't yet have a result, but I think we will, once we get the result, we will be able to, I think, to make it public, because as much as possible, we have taken a decision to be open about the work we do and about what we find, because one of the important tenets of criminal law is that it has to have a deterrent effect. And if you only respond to crime secretly and privately, then you miss out on that very important aspect of deterrence. With regard to the COVID time, it's actually true that we too were not classified as essential services. So we had that challenge of how to, and yet we could actually feel that there were things that were, well, where we probably would have had, we needed to play a role. So we used the COVID time to deal with backlog. It was actually a great opportunity to deal with many, many files. I, for one, carried lots and lots of files to home and worked on them. And we also asked our staff to deal with matters that don't require human interface, to deal with them home. Fortunately for us, maybe a little better than the DPP, most of our staff are connected on internet. We taught them, we had asked our IT people to train them in the use of Zoom, and people are connected on Zoom. We asked our teams to start speaking to each other and to practice the use of technology. But to us, I think the most important thing we've done post-COVID is it coincided with the end of our strategic plan, which was running from 2015 to 2020. So we use this time to rethink the way we deliver our services. One of the issues, for instance, that has come to the fore, some of you may have been following the Transparency International reports, which show that Uganda never scores above 30% on all the items of anti-corruption, the fight against corruption and the effectiveness. You may have also noticed that many of the East African countries perform within the realm of 130 to 180, which is the lowest ranking countries in terms of fighting corruption. So we have now taken time to actually look at our strategic plan and to interrogate, one, why the public thinks that very little is being done in the fight against corruption, yet we have done so much. We have tried to involve the public. We have streamlined, we've created a Directorate of Special Investigation to deal with high impact cases. We have tried to address the issues of ombudsman and governance. We've automated the leadership code and declaration of assets system. We have established partnerships with the religious organizations, with civil society, with other sister agencies. But whenever the public is consulted, whether they are satisfied with the performance of the Inspectorate of Government, the answers are actually quite disheartening. So what we are thinking now is we're realizing that we may not have a shared understanding of the meaning of corruption. So we notice that I think in the world there's a lot of speaking at cross purposes. You think you're telling somebody this, but the person understands something completely different. And the more we interrogate that, the more we get convinced that actually we are not talking about the same thing. We define corruption as abuse of public office for private gain. But actually, when you talk to a citizen about what is the state of corruption in the country, if on that day the person has been to a clinic, to a government hospital and has been forced to pay for services that they expect to be delivered free of charge, they will say, oh, the situation is very, very bad. If they have seen, if they've been sharing campaign funds and they found they missed out on a campaign bribe, they said these other people have got it. Oh, the state of corruption will be very bad. If the child has not been admitted to school, so we are now discovering that actually there is no universal understanding, or let's call it national understanding of the concept of corruption. So we've taken that seriously. We want to organize a general meeting with all the actors, civil society, and so on, to just interrogate that concept. What is corruption to the mind of a Uganda? Then, number two, we have actually discovered that most of the corruption in Uganda is opportunistic. People are being corrupt because they are not properly supervised. So isn't it time for us to just teach every leaders at all levels, to just ask them to teach them the concept of supervision? People are stealing because money is released, but the person who releases money does not go to ask, how far are you with delivery of a government project? So we are seeing all these interconnections that were probably not well understood prior to COVID. So we think that, yes, you asked a question about what challenges we face. Yes, of course, right now we don't have, IGG has not yet been appointed, and the law states that the Inspectorate of Government consists of 3 people, the IGG and the 2 deputies. Now that's a technical position. Now, if one of the 3 is missing, according to the court interpretation of that law, then the Inspectorate of Government does not exist. Now, that may sound small, but it has actually had far-reaching implications. It just means we cannot sign contracts. We cannot approve charges of the corrupt because we now have to go to Lady Justice Abodo. Every time we find evidence against somebody, we have to go to Justice Abodo and then persuade her to charge the person. I mean, normally she's cooperative, so I really wouldn't want to complain about that. But I mean, you just see that there are some hindrances we are facing. Nonetheless, we are using this time to take a long-term view, which I was referring to earlier. We would have to start a transformation of the country by dealing with the long-term issues. And it just means that we cannot solve every problem, but the country needs to reach a consensus on what are those values that are inalienable, that are so important to the country, that we must all cause force to bear, that they are protected, they are entrenched, they are taught, they are ingrained in every Ugandan citizen. Because that, again, is also missing. People's value systems are not quite clear. So, I mean, I could talk a lot about this, but maybe that would take us outside the remit of this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. George Bamugemereire. Just before you sit back, one question from Timothy Lumunye is, now that you seem to suggest that increasing numbers of judicial officers may not be the immediate solution to fight backlog in the judiciary, what other options, in your view, that may bring about efficiency in the administration of justice at the bench can you suggest? I know you have suggested value systems among others, but if you have any other, that would be good. But the second question from Gabriel is, the sector is still heavily funded by donors. COVID shows us that we need to rely less on external sources. How do we start to implement this? Maybe you could also say something about that, and then Rachel would also say something about that, since she comes from the JLO sector as well, Secretariat. Thank you, Dr. George. Dr. George, if you're responding, then you're...
Yes, Daniel, yeah. Sorry, I was just asking about the second question. I missed
yes.
The end of it. What was the second question?
So Gabriel Iguma is asking that this JLO sector is heavily funded by donors, and yet COVID shows us that we need to rely less on external sources. And so he's asking, how do we start to implement this?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I would say, starting with the with the first question about options. I think what I was saying is that COVID has actually given us a chance to go back to the drawing board. Question is, why do courts exist? Why do prisons exist? Why does the police exist? Two, looking at what are the drivers of backlog in the system? You'll find, and I think Lady Justice Abodo referred to it, there are a lot of cases that could be solved elsewhere that are ending up in courts. So there is a case for us to look at processes, actually to get into what they call process mapping of the entire government structures, entire government institutions, everybody going through the process, what they call a process mapping process. Where does the process start? I mean, first of all, what is the process? What is its purpose? What is its end result? And what is the process of delivering? What steps should one take to deliver the end result of the process? If the whole country went through that process, and by the way, not just the government, but even the private sector and churches, you know, every institution and how do we get there? And what is the outcome we are looking at? I may say there that I think even the government is shifting. They're saying they're shifting from, is it sector-based? Maybe our friends in Jellison, to program-based, you know, looking at what is the outcome of what we are doing. Now, that is a very important process. You will find that many institutions have actually deviated from their main objective. They've got bogged down with processes, with functions that do not add value to the purposes for which they were set up. So I recommend process mapping. Number two, I recommend diversion. If a matter is coming to the court, but that matter can be solved elsewhere by another structure, let us divert. Number three, when we divert, we want to make sure that the structure to which you are diverting a small or a dispute actually functions. And that's why I was talking about the ombudsman function and supervision. That danger, one of the reasons there's a backlog is because the courts look at the poor citizens coming to them and say, and a citizen tells you, I tried so-and-so, I tried the cultural leader, I tried the local LCC, I tried the officer in charge, and nobody gave me help. So that is creating backlog. So if we started a process of just saying, let every system, courts can be able to divert some cases, say, case can actually be dealt with. Some of them have died, but those ideas, who are the facts to actually deal with the disputes that arise? They expect an FC1 to be able to sit. If a man beats up his wife, they should be able to sit to do it. We shall break into that house and take you to the police, you know, things like that. So I believe in going back to the foundations, rebuilding the processes. So that would really be the first process. Number two is obviously to check on the efficiency. You know, because they don't expect the court to deliver justice quickly. So a person comes and grabs your land and says, okay, if you're not happy that I've taken your house, take me to court. I'm sure you've read about cases like that, where somebody says, I know that when I get to the court, the following things will happen. One, it will take a year before the case is cause listed. When it's cause listed, I can make sure we have 10, 20, 100 adjustments. There have been cases that have lasted 20, 30 years. So a generation dies out and the case is passed to the next generation. So why can't we say, let's deal with efficiency? What is the person looking for? What is the outcome that the litigants are looking for? And that's why I actually hail the innovations of arbitration and mediation and so on, because that is, I think, an effort to say, what exactly are you looking for? What is your bottom line that you're looking for from us? So let's explore those kind of concepts. I think we can talk a lot more about this. Then regarding funding, it's again the same question. A lot of talk has come about funding. We need to have a meeting, a conference. What is the cost of a conference? It's 600 million. I can tell you last year, we hosted what they call the Commonwealth Africa Anti-Corruption Conference here in Uganda. The Inspectorate of Government, it was our turn to host after Nigeria, it cost us 600 million just for local expenses, you know, getting this, booking the hotel in Serena and so on and so forth, transporting people. And that excludes tickets. This year, the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, who had been so impressed with the level of organization last year, said, can Uganda just host again, but this time host the same conference online? How much did it cost us? Zero, apart from airtime. I think the people who died in on airtime. So down from, say, let's take a ballpark figure of £1 billion shillings last year. This time, because of COVID, they hosted a conference, had speakers from all over the world and all over Africa, and had the Commonwealth Secretariat participate, actually coordinating it from London. They called us nominally the hosts, but actually they were hosting it in London, and held the same meeting, same high level, very interesting recommendations at no cost. So this issue of funding has to be re-examined. I have noticed part and wearing the hat of Inspectorate of Government, that every program, when you look at the cost drivers, you'll be shocked. We need to roll out a plan to deliver mosquito nets, then ask for the people to do it. You'll be surprised what the main drivers of expenses are. We need allowances for so and so. We need fuel for so many cars. We need this and that. But if you looked at what can we do to deliver mosquito nets or masks or books, or scholarly materials, and you just went through line by line, you find that there's a lot of fat on unnecessary activities which are not essential for delivery of the ultimate services. So I think it's again an opportunity for us to look at the budgeting system.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. George Bamereire. Mercy, I hope you are there with us. I would like you to prepare to respond as one of the people who work for a jealous institution. There is this pertinent question of sponsorship that I would like you to speak to, but let's first listen to the Secretariat, and then we shall come to you as URSB for your insight into this pertinent question. Rachel?
Yes, thank you. I think Dr. Bamereire said a lot about it, about efficiencies and about how we can manage costs. Maybe just first of all to clarify, yes, we do rely on development partners. We do rely on donors to support our program. However, when you look at our budget now, close to 50% of it is now funded by Government of Uganda. And the figure of funding that we've been getting from Government of Uganda has been rising over the years. So it's not 100% donors, it's actually almost 50-50. But one of the things that we're trying to emphasize is the efficiencies, because Dr. Bamereire talked about efficiency. Efficiency is in terms of the service, physical access, the time someone takes, but it's also in terms of the cost and the human resource factor. So we're trying to look for the more efficient ways of doing it. And he mentioned, for example, conferences and meetings. And I think the DPP, if she was here, and Mercy and the others would know that most of our functions have now moved onto the online platform. And when we ask our members if the situation changes, would we want to resume? Many of them say, no, we are happy to continue the way we are. And it's a huge efficiency gain for us. But even then, for the other programs, our other reforms, the usual reforms that we implement and we develop, one of the things we always look at is the sustainability factor of those reforms. What will be the long-term sustainability? How can we continue to maintain this particular initiative without any additional costs? So for most of the initiatives that we have, we look at the institution that's responsible and we say, how in the long term can you integrate this into your day-to-day working? How can it become part of your routine system? So it may start off as a project, or as a pilot, or as an ad hoc initiative, but the long-term solution is to integrate it into your business processes, integrate it into your normal functioning. So you look, for example, when we took up the automation process across the institutions, many of them have now integrated it, and it's part of their routine work. So those of you who have interacted, for example, with the company's registry, you'll know that now you can file online, you don't have to print out documents, and that saves costs, the administrative, the stationery, and the paper on Mercy's side as well. We've seen a similar progression in the passport office, where now you do everything online, you just go there to pick up your documents. So similarly, even with the activities of the Uganda police, with the prisons, we're telling them as much as possible, integrate all these initiatives into your day-to-day routine work, so that we don't have to continue with the costs as projects or donor-funded projects, but they become routine part of everyday work. And that's really how that's what we think is the best way to migrate from the donor funding to routine government funding, and having these as routine government activities funded through their regular budgets. And that's the long-term goal through the sector.
Thank you, Rachel. Mercy, you are a recipient of support from the Secretariat, I presume. What is your take on that? And maybe if you could give us just one or two insights on what URSB has been doing in spite of COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruhweza and fellow speakers. Uganda Registration Services Bureau is a JLOS institution that is charged with the registration of businesses, documents, intellectual property, business rescue, that is insolvency and liquidation of entities, operating registries of secured interest in movable property, commonly known as chattels, business advisory services, and handling also of civil marriages and licensing places of worship. It's a whole list of the things that we do. And when COVID struck, we had actually, it's like we had prepared. We had not, though we had not predicted the impact of COVID, we had already done the electronic document management system. We had digitized all our documents, enabled and sponsored by JLOS, of course. We had online systems already waiting, others were under testing, others were being utilized by the public, and it was very easy for us to migrate immediately when the physical stoppage to our work was given and issued by the state. So there's business continuity. There's no one moment when we ever stopped to register business, to register trademark, to register patent. The only affected area was the civil marriages because they needed physical engagement. There's no platform or no legal framework at the moment for conducting an online marriage between the parties, and that is what was affected. So, but for all the services, we continued giving to the public the registration through our online registration system, because our theme for this year was and is still all digital, all online, and we had been working towards that. We were more than ready. But this gives me an opportunity to again thank JLOS for all the support to URSB, all these systems you see in place, the infrastructure, the computers, the digitization was all enabled by JLOS, and even the vehicles that we have as URSB were used to rescue the COVID victims, but also offer services, because we put all our vehicles, we handed over all the vehicles that were bought through the JLOS Secretariat to the health centers and KCCA, and they were busy doing the COVID interventions. I think that's it for you, Daniel. In fact, we collected our revenue, yes, was a bit affected, but we continued to collect revenue as far as a business registration is concerned. And interestingly, when it came to intellectual property, we got more collections, revenue collections, more registrations, because we saw local manufacturers coming up with the products that were used to fight COVID, the masks, the sanitizers, the innovations in the area of COVID interventions. So there was more creativity actually during the season. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mercy. Our dear panelists and those who have been following us in this webinar, we are now coming to a close. I'll just allow me to ask one final question to Dr. Sylvia Nambiru, and then I will hand over to Dr. James Magara to to close this up. But we shall have one last poll question before that. Sylvia, if you could very briefly speak to the question of the high death rate of men, especially in incarceration, the emasculation of men, what would be your proposal as LASPNet on how we can address this issue of the emasculation of men, the increase in death, especially by suicide, and and mainly in northern Uganda, first because of the LRA conflict, and now exacerbated by COVID-19. What innovations, what can we do in that regard? And maybe just a comment on the fact that in spite of the comments of the issues raised to His Excellency, the President, regarding the high rate of pregnancy of our young girls, the President said that we need to have a balance, we had to protect majority of citizens from dying due to COVID. And whereas pregnancy was unfortunate, at least, yes, pregnancy brings a lot of challenges, but the balance tipped in favor of maintaining and sustaining life. From your perspective as ED, CEO, Legal Service Providers Network, what insights can you give to that? After your response, we shall go to the poll question, and then Dr. Magara will summarize. Thank you all for being patient with us.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And I once again want to appreciate all the panelists and our presenter. You have given me quite a difficult last question to address. This should go to the medical specialists and psychosocial counselors, the high death rate of men and the emasculation of men. Of course, we need to look at this in the context of the right to life and the right to health and the right to economic access to economic activities or income. Any man or any woman would feel wholesomely, would have a wholesome life when they feel that all areas of their lives are catered for. And every man would want to be on top of fending for their families. That is how they have been wired. The social wiring, the narrative, and all that. So for a man to be not in a position to provide for their families, that alone leads them into depression. And the depressive and loss of hope. And remember, the churches were also locked. You know how emotionally and morally and psychologically, when people go and worship their God, when they have religious leaders speak into their lives, for the born again, when they get prophetic kind of encouragement, even when they have lost despair, they are able to rejuvenate and have hope. In this case, we're locked down. People were having no income, especially those who live from hand to mouth. The churches were also locked down. They could not go to worship and push off some of the social issues. So as a result, the counselors were away and in a distance. So for any person who has no coping methods, probably they are living in a family environment that is not helpful, or Probably they are living alone. The depression levels increased. I heard of a young girl who died because of housework, which may not be true. Probably that child was faced with some kind of domestic violence. It was in Nansana. I heard of a man who set himself on fire before in the precinct of the police. That also has to be interrogated to the extent that someone just chooses to go before the police and around the police, they set themselves on fire, where they are supposed to be protected. They are those that were caught when they were about to do it. So the emasculinization of men losing their power and agency caused them to lose hope, and hence they died. That means the government of Uganda also had a duty to protect life and a duty to provide. And it all speaks to the level of unpreparedness that we had. That while we are protecting ourselves from dying of COVID, there were maternity, high mortality rates. There were those suicide cases, the highest number of suicides recorded. We may not have the statistics, but when we go further, you realize that majority of people died during this period because of loss of hope. My opinion and view would be for us, like we've said, to have a holistic preparation and approach to how we address such scenarios. How do we help people to cope? Do we just tell people, go and stay in your homes, you are safe? What are the coping mechanisms that we sustain? Would it have been better to ensure that there is those psychosocial support mechanisms remaining? So this is teaching us a whole range of preparing comprehensively and not ad hoc and not in piecemeals for us to be able to protect lives, because lives matter and they are protected under different conventions, including our constitution. I'll now get into the issue of high-rate pregnancies and early marriages. In northern Uganda alone, we were told by our regional representative that over 800 pregnancies were recorded and early marriages. In eastern Uganda, we are told that they were fourth in the report that was released. They were the fourth in GBV. Other places are not documented. We know what the police gave us. But we also know that many of our girls were affected by just mere staying in two homes, being married off, and more and other social evils that befell them. We were in Omoro to launch the legal aid clinic, which we call the cost-effective legal aid clinic in between public and private partnership, the Omoro district. And the CID officer informed us that in Omoro district, to find a girl child who is 10 years and is still a virgin is a miracle. He informed us of the hot spots where girls are more affected. The wells, sometimes during harvest, he gave us a different scenarios. But then he added and said, if that is the case before COVID, it has even worsened during COVID. So while His Excellency said we need to protect lives and ensure that the children stay at home, we really think that the repercussions that are going to come out of this process are going even to be much more difficult for the nation to manage. The increased school dropouts, the child mothers, a mother giving birth to a child, the domestic violence increasing in that scenario of where a child is married off when they're still young, the psychosocial and emotional evils that go with giving birth when you are not yet due, the violence that is occasioned on the children in the future to come, maybe would be even much more difficult to manage than if we had maybe dealt it otherwise. Well, during the actual lockdown, even before we entered into partial, why we did not register any death? And now we have registered deaths even during after the partial lockdown. One would ask, what was the intention that took us into a total lockdown? And then we came into a partial lockdown, which partial lockdown is now actually, we are registering deaths. How did we manage not to register death during that total lockdown? And now we are registering the case. So probably government will tell you they were preparing for the facilities in the health sector. But all in all, whereas the cases of COVID deaths and those affected may not be may have been controlled. If we go deep into the research and we get the real statistics, the cases of SGBV, the violence occasioned on the girl child, even the boy child, we are going to see that is going to be much more, and is going to take this country into probably more poverty, more social evils, more related repercussions that I can't mention here because I'm not really a specialist in the social area. I'm just giving perspectives of a social justice advocate. But generally, that is what I would say, that we need to plan better as a country and have comprehensive responses.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sylvia. We'll now take on our last polling question. We'll kindly request you to respond to this one, the last one. Are Uganda's traditional justice systems a realistic complement for the judicial system? Are Uganda's traditional justice systems a realistic component for the judicial system? Option one, yes, the examples availed have worked. No, cultural diversity may jeopardize consistent application. And then no, since not much is known about traditional justice. And finally, yes, the Western judicial approach is expensive and causes a lot of backlog. By traditional justice mechanisms, I hope we all understand the question. Thank you very much. Thank you for your voting. Thank you for your voting. All right. Those are our results from the polling question. Are Uganda's traditional justice systems a realistic complement for the judicial system? And your answers are as follows. 47% say yes, the Western judicial approach is expensive and the cause of backlogs. Others, 21% say no, since not much is known about traditional justice. 16% say yes, the examples availed have worked well. And 16% are also saying no, cultural diversity may jeopardize consistent application. Thank you once again. I would like to thank our panelists for being with us, the Honorable, the Lady Justice, Mrs. Jane Frances Abodo, who is the DPP of Uganda, the Honorable, I'll call him Uncle George Bamgemerede, Deputy Inspector of Government, the former Her Worship, now Dr. Sylvia Nambiru, CEO of the LastNet, Legal Aid Service Providers Network, and my dear sister Mercy Kainogwisho, Director, Intellectual Property and Rotary Services Bureau. And last but certainly not least, my sister Rachel Odoi, who is the special policy, I got that right. I got that wrong. Let me get the proper citation for Rachel. I apologize. Who is the special technical assistant for the Justice, Law and Order Secretariat. Thank you so much for the useful insights. Thank you to all those who've been listening in, and I'll now hand over to Dr. James Magara to finalize and conclude our session this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel, for guiding a very vibrant discussion. And to all our distinguished panelists, thank you very much for your time and also your contributions. Those of us who are not in the legal profession have got more land about your profession and about the justice law and other sector. And we've picked up the ideas and we really appreciate your contribution. We do hope that beyond this time, the conversations will continue. And we hope that some linkages have happened that will carry on. And as I said earlier, we will be extracting things that we can bring out as either recommendations and papers. This will stretch right into next year. So do look out for our contacts coming to you again. Thank you very much, participants, for staying the time and contributing as well through the Q&A, and at least one person spoke today. Thank you very much. We've got to close now, and I'm wishing you all a very good weekend. I'll just lead in a word of prayer and then we'll close. Lord, we thank you that your throne is established on righteousness and justice, and these are things that are very, very close to your heart. Today we addressed and touched many of them, and we pray that you help our country become a more just country with more righteousness. We pray that you give us ideas and thoughts that we can incorporate into our society to reduce the level of crime and to promote righteousness in our society. We pray you bless the weekend and bless all those who have participated, especially as panelists in this session. We ask all this in our Lord's name. Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. And Daniel, are you closing, or can I just say we are closed?
No, please go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. Next week we'll be discussing domestic revenue. So please prepare for that. We will be having some very interesting panelists. So look out for the announcements, and see you again next week as we discuss domestic revenue. Have a good weekend.